And just like that, Rafael, we are here for a special horror-themed episode of Longbox Punk. That's me. I'm Chris. I'm the Longbox Punk. I am joined by Rafael Flores Jr., a post-punk in his own right, coming back to hang out and talk all things spooky. John ended up having to get called in to work due to a COVID whatever that's called, and so COVID prevented him from being here, so add that to the list of things that COVID sucks at. So but that's totally okay, because Raphael's a rad dude, and if you weren't, I wouldn't have invited you back. And so I'm stoked to have you on a Sunday afternoon to talk horror here in the best season and the best month of all. So my friend, how are things? How are you doing?
Things are good, man. I did my first convention not too long ago, Texas Latino Comic Con. That was a blast. I got to meet a lot of great guys. That's where I got to meet John, Vina,
Okay.
and Mickey Martinez, and a bunch of other sweet, cool dudes. And yeah, it was great. We made a lot of money selling the first issue, and we got to meet some fans. But bought in the Kickstarter campaign, and some of them brought their books to get signed.
That's
That was
awesome.
just it blew my mind, like, because it was my first convention,
Yeah.
So it was great, and right now, yeah, we're just getting ready for the next one.
Nice. Yeah. So for those that don't know, Return of Camazotz issue number 2 is currently live on Kickstarter, running through Halloween. October 31st is the last day to back. And if you read the first issue and you loved it, good news, there's more. If you haven't read the first issue, good news, you can back a catch-up tier and read the first issue and then be in on the know on the second issue as well. We're going to talk plenty of Camazotz. We're going to talk plenty of comics, but first, being horror and being spooky season, and also shout out to my pal Jolly Green for hanging out with us on a Sunday. I want to talk horror. Like, how did you get it? What's your origin story with comics? What's your origin story with horror? Like, how'd you get into it? What about the genre do you love? Let's start there.
For me, it was mostly living with my older cousins or hanging out with them a lot. They were always watching horror movies. They were a lot older than me. A lot of them were like 17, 20,
Okay.
and I was like 4 or 5, and so they were watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre and House of a Thousand Corpses, just classic movies, man, and American Werewolf in London. So, like, I grew up just around that, and we would watch it with them. So it was never like we would get scared, obviously, but it was fun for us. So I would say that's basically for me. And then after that, you just never stop watching them, right?
Yeah. One always leads to the next. So my first introduction to horror was actually Hitchcock, and I was at my Nana's house, and there's a double shot like on our local like Star 64 whatever, and they were doing The Birds and Psycho. And my dad came home halfway through The Birds as I was just like transfixed by this movie. And I think I was maybe like probably right around 10. So like 10 or 11 or 12, somewhere in there. And I just was like totally sucked in. He was like, is that Hitchcock? And I was like, uh-huh. And my Nana was in the kitchen making dinner, I'm sure. And he was just like, I don't know if you should be watching that. And he like turned, and it was right when like the birds were pecking out people's eyes. And he was like, looked back at me, and I was just had this stupid grin on my face. And he was like, all right. And so we sat down and we watched The Birds, and then we watched Psycho afterwards. And I was just like, from there, I was hooked, and then discovered all of the 80s movies, because I started black and white. And so like for the longest time, I only watched like the black and white horror, and then slowly got into like, oh, there's newer horror that's out there. And then once I got a TV in my room, like it was over. And I just started, renting movies from my local Hollywood Video. And before I worked there, and then when I worked there, I went through I watched every horror movie that we had in our like horror section, which was daunting as a college kid working 2 jobs and taking classes and being a dad and all of the things. I was still watching all this horror stuff, but it was just like, I can't get enough, and it's not stopped. And now that I've, gotten back into comics in the last 15 years, discovering all the great horror comics that there are, has really just strengthened the love of the genre for me. So, when did you first start reading horror comics? Do you remember the first ones that you read?
For me, it was, I think Junji Ito was probably the first horror comic I read. I mean, I think actually if I go back even further, maybe the Mask
Okay.
from Dark Horse, and maybe some of those Alien and Predator comics. I read a couple of those, but it
Yep.
was like just single issue floppies that I had as a kid, and I would just read them. I remember the Mask being kind of unique because it was like I was familiar with the Jim Carrey movie,
Hmm.
but this was like a different type of mask. Like he was like killing people and like his it was there's a lot of horror elements in it. And so I wasn't really familiar with that. I was like, what is this? This is weird. But as I went into like college, that's whenever I really discovered horror comics because you go into your comic section and there's Junji Ito,
Yeah.
and I remember it was like a collection of short stories, and they're really quick. You can consume them really fast,
Yep.
and I like them because it kind of reminded me of like if it was like the Twilight Zone but with horror.
Yeah.
And so I feel like they all had like a little like message or something to say, or maybe they were just really weird and strange, and I loved that. Uzumaki and the
Hmm.
Spiral one.
Yep.
That was the next one I read of his, and that one just like twisted in my mind, like because it's like that's true, man. There's spirals everywhere.
Yeah.
After that, you can't like cannot stop seeing it.
Yeah.
Um, and so Junji Ito was huge for me. Um, I didn't really read many American. I haven't really read too much American horror. Um, so I don't really know what's good out there, honestly. Um, but I'm making my own, I guess.
Yeah, you're in the right spot because so I didn't discover Ito until maybe 2 years ago, and I happened to like I was at my local convention, and there's always a booth that I spend way too much money at that only sells like discount trades,
Mhm.
and they had a whole shelf of Ito's books. And I was like, and they were all different. And I was like, holy crap. And they were the small hardcover. Like I own some manga, but usually like everything that I owned before I bought that was all like the soft cover, like the Dragon Ball Z or Super.
Right. Tokyo
Uh,
Pop and stuff.
yeah, yeah. So like all the, the just the floppy, like here's a chapter of the whole manga, like enjoy. And then some of like Uzumaki is a larger hardback, at least the one that I have.
Mhm.
And I picked it up and I was just like, what is this? Like it looked
Right.
so different than so many other horror books that I've read. And so I immediately had to buy it. And then I actually read it last October. I only read Ito's work in October because I was like, I just want to be consumed with like
Mhm.
the horror. And I don't know what that says about me, but I loved it. Like his style is so different than
Mhm.
anything else. And it's just like you said, it's very Twilight Zone. And I love Twilight Zone
Me too.
growing up because again, like black and white, it's very bite-sized. It gives you an entire story and bam, boom, it's done. And then it sits with you, right? Like there's
Yeah.
still some episodes of Twilight Zone that I can think about and remember watching and just being like, it was so weird. And
Yeah.
similar with Ito's stories, with those like anthologies, he's easily like the master of Eastern horror, of just like what he's doing with body horror and psychological and all of the things
Mhm.
is just so freaking good. So but yeah, like when thinking about American horror comics, um it's very easy for me to immediately think like Tales from the Crypt and Eerie. Shout out to the Grim One himself. Um, and so, like, have you read any of the Tales from the Crypt books, or like the recently relaunched EC, the in Entertainment Comic Studios, where they're doing both horror and sci-fi right now?
I went back and I did read a couple of the older EC comics stuff, and Grimcore released Screams from the Past, which is like a anthology of some of these old classic horror comics. I read a couple of those. They're always kind of like I feel like they're kind of dated a little bit,
Okay.
but they're fun. They're interesting, you know, especially the pre-code ones where like they're basically in the public domain.
Yeah.
And those ones are very interesting because you know you can kind of like you can take stuff from those if you wanted to, like because they're public domain,
Yeah.
and there's some interesting stuff if you can dig in there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean I've read a lot of creepy stuff. You know, I read Batman a lot
Hmm.
growing up. His villains are always type of like horror-esque in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
especially like Universal type monsters. You know what I mean? And I read like Y the Last Man and a lot of the Vertigo type stuff. And I guess like what else? I don't know. There really hasn't been much out there. I feel.
Yeah.
I've read
There's
Walking Dead.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my comic confessions, and I started that hashtag over on Threads, but because I think it's just fun to see, like, it's always the like, what's your hot take? I'm like, usually those posts end up being like, oh, this was terrible, I hate it, and like, I don't want it to be negative, but like one of my comic confessions is I'm not like wildly in love with The Walking Dead books or TV show. Like I've read the first 2 volumes of Walking Dead, and it just didn't do much for me. And I
Sure.
don't know if like it was because I just finished reading like 4 books from Junji Ito, and then I went to Walking Dead, and like I don't know if that's the problem for me. I don't know. I want to revisit it because like so many people, like I think I'm the only one that I remember talking to that actually read more than like a floppy of it, and just didn't like. Usually I get this reaction from people like, as a horror fan and as a comic fan, I should love The Walking Dead, and I just don't. But you know, maybe I'll revisit it and give it another go.
I think it's really good. I think it's very much a like a soap opera in a type of way. It's just characters talking a lot of the times, and I think that's what's really good about it. Is just the character interactions. You grow like a bond with these characters. You want to see them survive, and then he kills them. You know,
Yeah,
and then that really like it destroys you. It destroys you, and then you like you know it brings in new characters, and you're like, who's this guy? I don't trust him. You know, and
yeah.
so there's like a lot of mystery. Also, it's black and white. So
Hmm.
when I remember reading it, I read them really quickly. Like I had the compendiums, and I checked them all out from the library, and I just like I caught up real fast because they were just so quick to read. Like they're very simple, just dialogue basically
Yeah.
throughout the story. There wasn't too much action unless it's like a zombie getting its head chopped off. So it was really good for me. I enjoyed it.
I will say I have an appreciation for it because it does feel like like knowing it's a zombie book, it doesn't feel like it's all zombies all the time. And
Mhm.
it's much more about the crew of survivors and the relationships that they build and the trust, mistrust. So I will give it that credit. Like it is very much a character driven story set in the middle of this horrific, like zombie infested world.
Mhm.
And like, while I appreciate that, I think that might also be my problem with it
Sure.
is with it being such a like benchmark for horror comics. When you actually look at it for horror, there's really not like it didn't feel to me in the first 2 volumes that there really was a ton. It was just like maybe one per issue would have like, oh yeah, here comes zombies, let's kill them. Okay, move on. And
Mhm.
then it was like back to the living people and just like being jerks to each other.
Right.
And so maybe that was I don't know. I don't know. We don't need to completely tear apart Walking Dead and examine everything. But I do think it's probably worth me revisiting again because it's come up several times in several of these conversations with people talking about reading some of like Kirkman's scripts and how he scripted Walking Dead and then how it became like how that got turned into the comics. And so I think it's worth me at least revisiting. But that's neither here nor there. Back to you and your love of horror. Is there something unique about horror that draws you to it? Like why is horror like one of your favorites?
For me, I don't know, horror can be really anything, right? You can tell any type of horror story, and it's just a very mutatable genre that you can just like I'm really big into like a lot of different types of horror. So I'll just name a couple like Universal Monsters, like those movies. Those are horror, like right, like at its very classic stage.
Yep.
You can go then Japanese horror and Korean horror. They have their own type of like way of doing it. Especially they're like Kwai-Dan and like these old classic Japanese movies. House is one that I really.
I was gonna ask you if you've seen House.
Yeah. So like I love like there's another one. It's like almost like a body horror. It's called something the Iron Man, Tetsudo the Iron Man.
Okay.
And it's like this guy turning into like this monster machine. It's like it feels very David Lynchy too. Okay. I love it. And then David Lynch, you know, I love like Eraserhead and like that weird, eerie kind of like body horror. That's something I really love about horror is the body horror and like the grotesqueness of it. Because other movies don't do that, and you get to see like guts spilling out of people's bodies, and you get to see faces melting, and I don't know, that stuff really has always been intriguing to me. I think as human beings, maybe some of us more than others, we have this almost like it's almost like a release for us to see like this kind of stuff. Like to see violence, it's like it gets it out of our system maybe, but maybe it's just enjoyable. I don't know. We like boxing, we like wrestling, right? So it's just part of it. I think horror is like right there next to that kind of stuff. Like we watch it to be entertained. And I'm trying to think anything else. I like modern day horror too. I love the stuff that I'm seeing from like the director that did Hereditary.
Okay.
That guy, he's doing really good stuff. Jenna Ortega, the movies that she's doing, like Scream. I really love the last two Scream movies that came out, and I'm glad that like it seems like the '90s are kind of coming back a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I grew up on like I grew up in '94. That was when I was born, and so I watched a lot of those slasher movies like Chucky, and I'm sorry to see Chucky got canceled, man. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
But
it was an award-winning show.
Yeah,
and, like super critically acclaimed, even like audiences loved it. And then it was the third season was the final.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and they had such good, like they had everybody back doing the show, so it was cool. But I love Chucky. There's another one, like all the slashers I watched, like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. I love those movies, and I don't know. I guess what brings me to horror is just that it's cooler than every other genre. Because you can just do whatever you want with it. Like you can be as sadistic as possible. It's just so cool. I mean, I like action movies, westerns, and samurai movies too. But that's because they do the same thing. You see a lot of shooting and blood and arms getting chopped off. That stuff just has always been the coolest stuff to see.
Do you you mentioned slashers? Do you have a favorite like franchise?
I wish they would all just combine and like become like a shared universe, because I love them all, man. I guess my favorite would probably be Child's Play, Chucky. That's why I was upset that they canceled it. But because that was one that I watched as a kid, man. Like my dad would let us rent it from the Blockbuster as a kids, and we'd watch it. My dad would let us watch The Exorcist, man. So like as a kid. So but the Chucky was the one that we wanted to watch, right? We didn't want to watch Exorcist. He put that on to scare us,
Yeah.
But Chucky was like, oh, this is like a doll, like it's fun, scary,
Yeah.
And Leprechaun was another one that we grew up watching. I don't know. I think Chucky is probably the one that just holds a place in my heart. But they're all great. I feel like they all have something unique to them. At least like the core like monsters, core slashers.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree completely. Like I feel like each of them were different enough and leaned into a different almost subgenre of like slasher that it kept them all unique. And I think that's why the conversation of like, who's your favorite slasher always comes up, because everybody's got a favorite. Like if you like horror, you've got a favorite. And so it's just a matter of like, well, what's your favorite and why? And like something that the Chucky movies did was I loved when they would use the camera perspective of Chucky, and
Mhm.
so everything was lower, and you're
Yeah,
seeing it from like this doll's eyes, where
yeah.
he's
You're
like
hearing a
running
little
around the couch, and yeah, just being a little hellion of like
yeah.
chaos.
I loved like the comedy of it all. Like it's a funny movie, man. When you watch it, and Brad Dourif's performance as Chucky is just iconic.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, see, and I feel similarly. Like that's why I love Nightmare on Elm Street. Like Freddy is my favorite, and I can't point to a specific reason why. I just when I saw the first Nightmare on Elm Street, I just remember like this is so over the top, and I love it. And like Freddy is at his best when he's just being super ridiculous, and like his arms are like 9 feet long in
Mhm.
each direction at the end of the alleyway. Like that's my favorite Freddy. And the further that you push him into just the like completely obscure and bizarre, the better I think he is. And so, but like I also love in recent years, I've been really enjoying watching the Halloween movies with Michael. And like even the new ones, even the Rob Zombie ones, even, like the originals, like all of them. I like all of the Michael. The one that always kind of feels like it misses the mark for me is Jason. Like that's I've never really like resonated a lot with those movies. And I don't
Mhm.
know if it's because I never went to summer camp. Like I don't have that experience. So I don't have that like, whereas Freddy, like everybody sleeps. And I think horror works best when it's in something that is like when it's found in the everyday.
Mhm.
And so like don't fall asleep. That's terrifying because everybody has to sleep all the time. So so you mentioned with like as you've been writing the Return of Camazotz, have you found yourself like wanting to include some of the things that you've seen in horror movies in the book?
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I grew up on a bunch of horror movies, so I feel like it's already in me to kind of like the tropes of it all of
Mhm.
horror storytelling. So I feel like that was just kind of natural while I was writing it. But I definitely watched a couple movies. Like American Werewolf in London was definitely the biggest inspiration, if not the really the one of the only inspirations. Well, no, there was touches of a lot of things like Dracula and even like real world horror with the COVID epidemic thing. Like
Yeah.
that's even a little bit in there too, if you want to read into it. Um, I don't know, like, but definitely American Werewolf in London. The whole beginning of it, where it starts with these two friends and they go to a new place they've never been to, right, London,
Yep.
and then they go to a bar and then they leave and then they encounter the werewolf and it kills one of them, and it's like very shocking because it's like you weren't really expecting that if you were like just watching it and you didn't really know what it was about, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be expecting it. It was very shocking. I remember the first time I watched it. Like I remember the first time I watched American Wolf in London. I didn't know I was watching American Wolf in London. It was just on,
Yeah.
and I got to sit down and just like, okay, what are we watching? And just watch it. And every part of that movie, every like shock and scared, like it got me. You know what I mean? Because I was like,
Yeah.
what is this? And and it keeps building and building into the very end where the guy turns into the werewolf, and there's that scene, the Academy Award winning scene where he changes into the werewolf, and it's like bone breaking and like
Yeah.
the fur growing on his skin, and oh man, it's just like an amazing scene. It
Yeah.
shocks you, it scares you, like it'll like scar you when you watch it for the
Yeah,
first
because
time.
it's incredibly well done, like even by today's standards. Because it's all like practical effects and it's all like they had to make all of that stuff. And so
Yeah.
it's just got that look. Like I really appreciate horror movies that still rely on practical effects and prop building and all of that stuff because if you start including like that's why I love one of the first like 80s horror movies that got me was the first Evil Dead, even though it wasn't like the scariest movie ever. when the possessed chick stabs the friend in the ankle with the pencil and like
Mm-hmm.
twists the pencil
Yeah,
around and
you
like
see
the
it?
raspberry jam comes out.
Uh,
Like all of that was done practically. And
yeah,
so like
it feels real.
just seeing it, it was like, this is disgusting. Like my buddy
Yeah,
and I, when we were done watching it, it was like, let's go do something fun. Let's play some video games. Yeah, that's fine. And so like we went and played like very bright, happy video games because it was just so dark.
yeah,
And because it
grotesque.
was all, yeah, like because it was all practically done, like those people had that fake blood all over them, and like
Mm-hmm.
the violence was real and you could see the puncture wound and all that, and like the sound effects. And so now that I have an appreciation for like the aesthetics and what goes into making movies, I
Yeah,
now like I get super excited. Like a Quiet Place, I love that movie because the sound is so intentional. Like when
mm-hmm.
you hear something, someone's about to die.
Yeah,
And so I love stuff like that that get included, not just the like pop scares, not just the, if it's just gory for gory's sake, it starts to get like, okay. But if you start to like play with my mind and make me feel safe and then have
mm-hmm.
something come out and just be terrifying, that for me is the sweet spot. Like, is slashers your, like, is that your favorite like genre of horror?
I don't know, man. I feel like I just like a mix of things. Um, I guess it just depends on what I'm feeling, really. There are times where I think maybe like body horror is probably be my favorite because I just love gross, like Terrifier is another one.
Yeah.
Like I'm excited for that new one. Like just movies with a lot of blood and gore. I do love those, but I do love, I love all the other ones too. I love the Universal monsters and I can watch those anytime I want.
Yeah.
It gives me a different feeling than the other ones. But yeah, I would say the grosser the better. That's just what I would like to make,
Okay.
or
Yeah.
I would enjoy making. I feel because I also have appreciation for the practical effects that goes in it, and just being able to watch that stuff. Because I used to be a filmmaker, and that stuff just it blows my mind to see how that stuff is made. I used to
Yeah.
love watching like behind the scenes, the audio commentaries the
Yep.
directors give. I've watched that for like The Evil Dead too, like because I wanted to hear it.
Yeah.
Like I love hearing about how that stuff gets made and like the contacts that those people had to wear, those thick glass contacts to make their eyes look like that.
Yeah.
Like the tons of goo and blood that goes into making these things, like it's amazing.
Yeah. And I do love, I think it was the remake of The Evil Dead, which was also excellent. The final scene where she's got the chainsaw and she just gets
Mhm.
completely smattered. I saw some like behind the scenes like short videos on Instagram or something of them like as they were filming it, and there were literally people with buckets of blood just like throwing it on her as she's doing it. And it was like a cold day, so that they cut and that you can see everybody's breath, and she is just covered in fake
Yeah,
blood. And I was just like, I love it. That's the thing about horror that I love, is that
yeah,
the people that make it are really dedicated to making it. And
yeah.
I just love it. I really do. Are there any horror like TV shows that stand out to you?
For me, probably what's it called? It was on American Horror Society, or what was it called? Was that what it's called? American Horror Society?
The American Horror Story, where like
Yeah,
every
yeah, American
season
Horror
is
Story.
different. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that one. Oh, I used to love that.
yeah.
That one was a big one. Right now, I've been watching Goosebumps on like Disney Plus.
Oh yeah,
I haven't like finished it yet, but I'm like halfway through it. It's got Justin Long in it, so he's like,
okay,
everybody. He's in a lot of horror movies.
yeah.
He's great in this. He's like the only reason I'm really watching it. But
Fair.
it's for kids movies. But my sister got me into it. Anything else? I think that's it. I haven't watched any good. I mean, Chucky. I watched a little bit of that.
Hmm.
Um, but I haven't really heard about anything recently.
Yeah, so TV is my like outage in horror, is because I don't feel like, other than American Horror Story, uh I don't feel like I watch a ton of it because I'm so busy watching like movies or reading
Yeah,
horror comics that like I just completely miss all of
right.
the
I don't
TV
watch much
out
TV
there.
either at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially with streaming, like just wait till everything's released and then just binge your way through it. And it's like,
Right.
oh yeah, I'll watch 3 episodes of American Horror Story, and that's like I just watched a movie. So okay.
I
But
did watch the Uzumaki, not Uzumaki. I
oh,
watched one of the Junji Ito animes. Not the one that the new one that's coming out on Cartoon
was
Network,
it
but the
the
previous one.
Japanese Tales of Macabre on Netflix?
Yeah, that one on Netflix. I started watching that just to because I'm trying to write a horror manga.
Okay.
So I'm watching those for as inspiration, and I am looking forward to the new Cartoon Network anime that's doing his work too.
Yeah.
So I'll be watching that for sure.
Yeah, because they also I didn't like I completely missed it, but there is an Uzumaki anime adaptation that's dropping that just started releasing
Hmm.
that I haven't seen yet. But yeah, I watched all the Tales in the Cobb and was just like, these are so like even the end credits where it felt like it always shows the alleyway. It's got the
Hmm.
kid in like the raincoat. Even
Hmm.
those with the voiceover stuff kind of all tied together as you watch them. So like even still keep watching during those credits because the voiceover all ties into it like a whole story too, which is just insane. It's so good.
I was skipping around, so I need to do that. I need to watch around, watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I started, like I'll turn that stuff on while I'm working and it'll just be my background noise. But then what I would find is I would, just have my hand on my mouse and just completely like into my
Mhm.
iPad just watching it. And so like I would go back to when the episode would end. I'm like, oh, it'll just automatically start the next one. And then the voiceover thing would start and I'm like, what is happening right now? And it's all it's
Yeah, got
don't
your
skip
attention.
it. It's good
Yeah.
stuff. So for me, like there's a book series that was written by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan called The Strain. And there
Mm.
were 3 or 4 novels. I always forget because it's been adapted into everything. So like there's a comic series that was put out by Dark Horse, also called The Strain, and it's like ancient vampires that are brought into the modern world, but it's a different feeling vampire. So instead of like fangs, they basically have this massive extendable like tongue sucker thing, and that's how they don't actually eat anything, but it's always this long tongue that will then go out, spear people, and that's what sucks the blood.
Mhm.
And it just like it treats it like vampirism is almost a virus,
Okay.
and it's set in New York, and it follows like a doctor working for the CDC or some such organization, and then like it follows him and then finding an old man that's been hunting the master, which is what they call their main vampire, who's been hunting him for like 60 years since World War II. And like it's got a lot of layers to it, and I really
Mhm.
enjoy it. And like I said, it's prose novels turned into a cartoon or into a comic book. They did a TV show. I think they did 4 seasons of the show on USA maybe, and like they've all been released on DVD at this point. I don't think it's streaming anywhere, which is
Mhm.
just a huge miss for me, but it's super good. And I love this story because I love Del Toro. Like I think he
Mhm.
does really excellent monster design even when it's not necessarily horror. Like his Cabinet of Curiosities show, where every
Mhm.
episode is something different, was awesome. Like if you haven't seen that, that's another like anthology type Twilight Zone, but specifically for like short horror stories. And then I guess I do watch horror TV now that I'm thinking about it, but it's all in streaming, so it doesn't
Mhm.
really count. But
I used
the
to one thing I used to watch on TV was Ghost Hunters. Any of those Ghost Hunter
yeah,
shows. I love
oh,
that show.
the wife and I watch Ghost Adventures
Yeah,
regularly. Like
yeah, yeah.
all that we actually dressed as them a couple years ago for Halloween, and I was Zach Baggins and she went as Aaron Goodwin, and we
Okay.
like did a fake episode at my buddy's property, and like we had somebody dress up in a sheet as our ghost. And, yeah, it was we had a lot of fun. But yeah, like I love paranormal stuff. My dad used to live in like a 200-year-old house, and it was haunted, and like all of us that were there spent like I never lived with him in the house, but any weekend that I was there with him, it like there was just weird stuff that happened.
Right.
And like my sister, when she lived with him in high school, she heard somebody running towards her door, and then like a thump at the door, and she got up and like opened it, like, the hell is that? And there's nothing there. Like she was the only one at the house. And like I was sleeping in the living room, like on the pull-out couch, and you used to have one of those rounded bay windows. So you could, so if I was looking at the window, I could see the reflection to the door, and the door opened by itself. And there was like a shadowy type figure, like in the opening of the door, because the hall light was on. So I could see that it looked like somebody was standing there, and then the door shut by itself. And like, I didn't get up. I didn't do anything. I just like kept laying there like, I know my dad went to bed. Like,
Oh God.
I know he did. And so I asked him the next morning, like, hey, did you come check on me last night? And he was like, no, once we got upstairs, like we just fell asleep and stayed and came down for breakfast. I was like, okay, cool, awesome. Add this to the list of the house. Like he heard people talking in the basement, like just random voices of like sounded like two different people having a conversation. And it was just like, I'm all about the eerie ghost haunting stuff. The one that like just creeps inside of me is like the possession stuff. Like any of those demonic possession tales, like any of the Conjuring movies, and the Ghost Adventures crew, the episode we just watched like 2 days ago, they were investigating the house that actually had the family that the Conjuring movies are based on. And like it was a creepy episode because like the guy just lost time and basically was possessed for like 15 minutes. And like that's the thing that like will legitimately get under my skin, where I'm like, okay, that's weird. I don't think I like that. So with horror movies, is there any type that you will like? Are there horror movies or anything that you avoid for any reason?
Honestly, I don't think there is. I mean, a lot of the older stuff, like snuff, like type stuff that is just like super gratuitous and just about raping people. I don't watch any of those. But I remember when I was a kid, I would like go on these lists of like goriest horror movies or that type of stuff. I loved gore, but there was some stuff that was kind of like that, I guess, that was on those lists, and those ones I could never get myself to watch them because it was just the way they film them. They make them look almost realistic, kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. Texas Chainsaw Massacre does that kind of feel in a good way. I feel I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but like a lot of those older just torture porn films, I don't watch those. But other types of torture porn, like the Saw, I love that stuff. So the Saw franchise, I'm a big fan of that. So it just has to be a right type, you know what I mean? It just I have to be feeling it. I've watched a lot of bad horror movies, like Human Centipede. Like those are ones like it's almost like a TikTok challenge to watch these movies. You do it to torture yourself in a way. But but I did it. You know, I mean, I watched all three of them. They're not good, but I wouldn't recommend them to anyone.
Yeah.
But like, I did it because I just had to see it.
It's like a rite of passage. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you just like Cannibal Holocaust. Like, I don't want to watch that movie, but I'm a horror freak, so I gotta at least put myself through it once, right?
Yeah.
So I'll watch any horror movie at least once. But it doesn't mean I'll watch it a second time necessarily.
That's fair. Yeah, I love. So there's an app that I use called Q, like Movie Q. Not just the letter, but you can track, like you can add stuff to what you're watching, to what you want to watch, and then what you have watched. And so I've gone through and looked for like horror movies on there, because every year I start building a horror list in like July. And then depending on how big the list gets, I then will start watching horror movies in like August or September, and then go all the way through October, and then continue through November and December and the rest of the year. But like specifically September and October, all I watch is horror.
Yeah.
And so I was looking similarly, like I was looking up a list of like the I like it's like psychological horror. I like that a lot. And so I was looking up at like lists for the, you know, best psychological. I love found footage. So I was looking up more found footage movies that I haven't seen. And I ended up looking at like a most disturbing horror, and I was like, oh, like Terrifier's on here. That wasn't that bad. I don't understand. Like when the second one was in theaters and everybody was like puking and passing out seeing it in theaters, I was like, my wife goes, I'm not seeing that movie. Like, I know you're going to watch it. I'm not going to see it. And I was like, all right. And so I finally saw it, and I was like, it wasn't even that bad. Like, I don't understand. But I think it's just the gross out factor of it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I love those movies for that. So, I mean,
yeah. And even going back to like the introduction of Art the Clown in I think it's All Hallows Eve, where there's like a short featuring Art in that, and then from like his popularity, it got spun into the Terrifier, and
I didn't know that
franchise. Yeah, so I like, because I'm that person where I'm like, well, okay, why is this a big deal? Where did it start? And I'll go there. And so I watched All Hallows Eve first, and it's like a collection of I think 3 or 4 like short story, maybe like 15-20 minutes, and then from there it just kind of escalated and grew. But man, God bless Tubi, because Tubi's got all the weird, just like super obscure horror stuff, and it's free.
Yeah, they do, and it's free too, right? Yeah,
like it's so good, and they're always updating. And usually I just go on and look at what's leaving soon, and I'll watch those. And then by the time I watch those and go around to the other things that are on my list and come back to it, it's a whole new stuff, like a selection of things that are leaving soon. I'm like, all right, well, I better watch that one because it's free.
I swear, it's like Tubi became what Netflix used to be, and Netflix is now just all original content.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm okay with it because Tubi's free. Because they update it like every month, and it's constantly rotating. And usually I think over half of my list this year, all the movies are on Tubi. I'm like, cool, I don't have to worry about paying for any of it. I love that. But on Q, so one of the like most disturbing movies that kept coming up was called A Serbian Film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's one. That's one that like I'm not gonna watch that movie, because I heard that they like, I don't like when people mess around with kids and when it's actually shown. And so I was just like, I read some things on that Q app in the reviews and stuff of like people that loved the movie and then people that hated the movie. You know, if they wrote reactions or reviews or whatever, like I would read a few of them, and then based on those, it's like, all right, I can sit through that, or like I'm not gonna. And so some of the things that I read about like some of the rape that's depicted, like anything with rape, I'm like, I'm out. I don't want to. I don't want to see that. You involve kids with that, and I was like, nope, hard pass. I don't need to sit through that.
No, don't watch it. Don't watch it, guys.
Yeah, no. See, so anybody that was questioning if they should watch that or not, because everybody, like, even the people that loved it were like, it's disturbing, it's upsetting, and I'm never telling anybody to ever watch this movie ever. And I'm like, so is it actually good then? Like, come on.
I don't know. I think some people just like to see the most disturbing thing out there. But there should be a limit, right, guys? Filmmakers, come on, we gotta draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, or at least like make it known what lines you're crossing. Like similar to if you're watching anything on cable where it's got the like adult content, violence, blah, 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 like tell me what kind. Okay, cool, violence. I expect that, it's horror. Like what kind of violence? Like if somebody's pet gets murdered. Okay, I don't need to see a dog get beheaded. Like I don't care to see that.
Fear was one that with Mark Wahlberg. Did you ever watch that?
Yeah.
That scene right there, it's shocked. Like that's scarring right there.
Yep. Are there so that's a good That's a good area. Like, are there other movies that you're like, I remember seeing that and how upsetting that was?
Uh, Serbian film was definitely one of those. I could not watch that movie ever again. I didn't even watch it. I just kind of like skimming through it, like because I was like, this is number one on the most disturbing
Yeah.
horror film ever made, basically.
Yep.
And yeah, you're just like, I'm done. Okay. So it's like, all right, I'm not gonna watch that. I've never like watched it all the way. I never sat down and watched it. I was just like, okay.
I mean, the fact
But
that you skimmed it is like, that's more than I'll do based on what I heard. So
but yeah, it's not a good film. It wasn't a good, like, even the scenes that were nothing like were happening really, like they weren't very well acted or anything. But
mm.
I don't know. That was definitely one of those movies. Maybe like what's that one? Requiem for a Dream.
Oh yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one. I don't know. I mean, just anything that's gross. Like The Fly. I remember The Fly, watching that as a kid. My mom put it on. And you see John, what's his name? Jeff Goldblum.
Jeff
And
Goldblum.
you're like, I love him. He's from Jurassic Park. This is like an earlier film that he's in or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're watching it, and then the movie just starts to go turn where he starts. I remember the first part where like he breaks the guy's arm, and you see the bone like
Yeah.
sticking out of his arm. That was like, whoa, like, oh my god. And it just builds from there. And when he turns into the monster and his body parts falling off and stuff like that, it's like his ear falls off and stuff. It's like,
Yeah, the ear falling out, like when
yeah,
his body starts just deteriorating. So
yeah.
that was one that like I didn't know what I was watching when I was watching it. And I was in high school, I used to babysit because like 5 of the houses around us all had kids that were under the age of 10. And so the parents were like, well, we can trust it, like he'll just babysit. And I happened to have like all 5 of the households. They wanted to go out together. And I was like,
Mhm.
I can handle all your kids. So I had a house of like 9 kids under the age of 10 and like one 13-year-old that was there. And he had sat down in the basement and turned on The Fly. I didn't know what we were watching because I was upstairs putting the babies in their cribs. So I came down and there's like 6 kids under 10 watching The Fly. And it was in that moment where he's like just got the pus and everything looks like it's melting and the
Mhm.
ear falls off. And I was like, oh God, what are you watching? And he was like, isn't it great? And like 3 of the girls were just like red in the face and on the verge of tears. And I was like, we're turning this off now. This is done. And then so when I sat down and actually watched it start to finish, I was like, yeah, it's still disgusting. Like it's just gross.
But it's great. It's all
It's
practical
so good.
effects. It's Cronenberg, I think, right? It's like so
Yeah.
it's just I remember watching as a kid being like it was disgusting, but I loved it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because it was just I'd never seen any kind of body horror movie probably at that point
Okay.
before that. And then that leads you to watch like The Thing
Yep.
and all the Cronenberg movies. I didn't even watch those until like college because that's whenever I could finally watch those movies because like you can find them because you couldn't find them anywhere.
Yeah. And if you could, it was like the censored for TV. So it would
Right.
have huge jumps and you would miss all of the transformation and the actual like body horror of it because it was
Yeah.
too gross to air.
Yeah. I believe it.
I didn't see The Thing until last year, like start to finish. I had seen parts of it and I had
Mhm.
seen the remake that came out in like 2010 or whatever. But I had never seen the original start to finish until last year because somebody talked about it. And I was like, I need to watch that movie. And like, everything is practical and the monster design is gross. And like, there's so many scenes in that movie that I'm like, it's just like I love how gross this is, and it's
Mhm.
gonna
Mhm.
stick with me as like it stands up because it's just so freaking good.
Yeah.
So speaking, all right, so we've talked plenty of movies and we've talked about comics. Let's talk about your comic and the Kickstarter that's currently running for Return of Camazotz issue number 2. Um, for those that don't know the story, give me like an overview of the story and then what folks can expect in the second issue.
Sure. So The Return of Camazotz is the book that I written, created, published by Grimcore Studios. It's a gothic Mayan horror story about twin brothers who go to Mexico. They encounter the Mayan god of death, Camazotz, and the story goes from there. Some crazy things happen in the first issue. If you haven't read the first issue yet, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but go ahead and buy the first issue. It's part of the thing you can add on to it. The second issue picks off right from where we left off. Victor wakes up, and we'll see where he is now. There's going to be a lot of mystery and involved, so can't really say too much. But there's a lot of mystery. There's some new characters that get introduced, and we'll see. Kind of, if you look at the covers, you kind of get a feel for what's going to happen. But yeah, there's going to be maybe some romance in there too, because it's a horror movie, right? You gotta you gotta throw some in there. And yeah, I'm super proud of it, super happy and excited about the second issue coming out. The team has worked really hard on it. All the artists, all the cover artists. So we got 4 great covers out there right now. Go check them all out. They're all different, all unique. I've been loving to see people's favorites. That's the poster you'll be able to get. Yeah, this is the cover A by Azrael.
So good, dude.
Mm-hmm. If you love American Werewolf in London, you'll love this. This gives you a little, a little bit about what happened in the first issue right there. We've gotten a ton of great reviews, not just by this guy, but by a lot of people. So, it's great. It's great.
All right, and so here's the poster.
Free poster with every physical tier. So you'll want to get that.
There's cover A again. Dude, the teal contrasting with the red on this cover is like just so eye-popping.
Cover B by Caetano Valenzuela. Really great artist, does really cool psychedelic type stuff. So I definitely had to get him to do a cover. This is our EC Comics and homage cover. It's kind of like a Tales from the Crypt type vibe. And yeah, this is by Alejandro Samada.
That's for those that are paying attention, that's the one that I backed because I love the classic feeling and the giant bat. Like, man, I love bats anyway. But
right. And this one's by Aria Medell, who worked on TMNT versus Street Fighter for IDW. It's coming back for a Chrome cover. And this is the cover that we designed. Super beautiful. I love it. Yeah.
And that's also an homage, right?
Yeah, and it's a homage to this old classic like vampire painting.
It's cool. Man, that's like when you've got horror fans making horror comics and you can do stuff like these two specifically. Like that's the bread and butter of horror comics. Like it's so good. So yeah, all of the options for any of the covers, all the things that you can check out, which you definitely should. So I'm excited. I'm glad that you're back on, so I can tell you this. I haven't said this to anybody, anywhere, or anything. When we talked the first time, our first episode, when both you and Mr. Grimm himself were campaigning about the Screams from the Past book, you mentioned that part of the reason that you wanted to do Return to Camazotz with the Mayan god of death was because of like some family heritage stuff, and it was just something that you wanted to explore more. And after we talked, I was like, my dad has tracked back our family history forever, and we have ties to the Abenaki Native American tribe that lived in like Vermont, New Hampshire, and then up into Canada. And I was like, I wonder if there's any like Abenaki mythology that I could explore and learn about, and then like maybe write something similar where I take elements of whatever they have in their folk tales and turn that into some sort of comic, preferably some sort of horror comic. And so I started researching, and there's a ton there. And so like I'm in the very, very early stages of it. But I think I have an idea for some of the characters that I'm going to use from their mythology to create like their ice cannibals that like have
Okay.
ice, like human shaped ice in like stomach and hearts. And so I think I'm gonna, and like it's basically when somebody does something terrible, specifically like denying other humans food, they would be possessed by evil spirits and then become these creatures who then were cannibalistic in nature and like lived in the wilderness in the woods, kind of like a Wendigo. But like their creation was different. And so like that character is one that the more that I find to read about it, because there's limited, like the Abenaki language itself is one of the dying languages, because there's like less than 2,000 speakers of that language still living. And so it's one of those things that the more that I read about it and the more that I find of it and on it, the more that I'm just like, this is so freaking cool. So I wanted to say thank you for sharing that piece about Camazotz, because it then inspired me to be like, that's something that I have a connection to and that I think is largely unexplored, and I could probably have a lot of fun playing in that sandbox. So that's what I've been working on. It's trying to research that. So
I'm happy about that, man. And anyone listening out there, you can do that same thing. There's so much different types of stories that are like ancient, and all these stories are public domain. I mean, anyone can use these stories and tell their own story with it. Obviously, do everything with respect, but but take it and run with it, man. And I'm glad you're doing that. Everybody else listening, you can do the same. So it's I feel like it's a great way to connect with those stories in a deep way, that you're doing that, because now you're adding to the mythology. You're a part of it now. You know what I mean? Like it's these stories were oral tradition. A long time ago, people were telling these stories and retelling them, changing them up, through the retelling of them. And so now it's our turn, right? So we need to take these stories and tell them for today's audience. And I'm just glad that you're doing that, man. I want to see more of that. So
yeah, it's been exciting. And like, so I never really knew much other than like, oh yeah, there's somewhere in our family lineage is like my great grandmother was like full-blooded Abenaki. And so like that's as far as I ever knew. And I was like, yeah, I got Native American blood. Like that's why I don't burn in the summers and I have very little body hair because like Native American. And so like it's always just kind of been the like throwaway type, like, it's probably the Native American blood, like whatever, it's fine. And like now that I'm actually like, this has led me to also research like the tribe and the history and like the controversy of like the New England Abenaki tribes versus the Canadian, and like what side they took on the French War. And like I'm just reading all of this extra additional history because I want to make sure I get it right. And also like it's just stuff I don't know about. And so now that I'm getting into it and reading more and researching more, it's one of the few times I was up until like 2 a.m. because I just couldn't stop. Like I would read an article and then it had a link to other sources and I would go to one and read that and then go back and go to another. And so now I'm reading all of this additional stuff, and 90% of it has probably nothing to do with anything that I'm going to be writing. But like for me, it's really cool because now it gives me more to talk about. And so like, it's only giving, like I've been talking to my wife more about it, and I got to call my dad and actually connect with him because he did a lot of reading on the Abenaki tribe too, when he figured out like, oh yeah, we can trace our family back to that tribe. And so like, I am looking forward to talking to my dad about it, to be like, yeah, that thing, like I'm going to turn that into a comic and have some fun with it. And so it's just like, it's just wins all around. And I think anybody that's interested at all in like where you came from, there's all like the folk horror is a subgenre that I never really ever paid much attention to. And then just in the last like 4 or 5 years, I try and watch at least one movie that's based on folklore as part of my like spooky season list, because every group of people have different folklores, mythologies, beliefs, like tiers.
And they're all largely horror, right? Isn't that funny? Like,
Yeah, they're
it's
all
like we're meant to
terrifying.
like horror.
So, and here is Daniel Grimm sounding off. So that cover C that we saw, which I can bring back here. Here's cover A. Man, look at me using technology. So cover C, and amazingly reading this for the audio listeners. It's an homage to the classic Tomb of Dracula cover. And then the chrome, which I will go, is this one here, which we spoke about. That is homage to the great Boris. Can you pronounce that last name? I don't know how to say it. Vallejo. Okay, I was overthinking it. Perfect. Yeah. So there's the extra info on that. So yeah, man, like I just think what you're doing with the Return of Camazotz series, what Grimcore is doing with bringing back some of those public domain stories and tales and screams from the past, like I'm just here for all of it. So I appreciate what you're doing with horror. That's the end of my notes. that's where we got to where I wanted to get to. But I appreciate you coming back on, hanging out, just kind of nerding out about horror stuff for a little over an hour with me on a Sunday here, or whatever time anybody might be watching or listening after the fact. I'll make sure that the Kickstarter is linked in the episode description so that anybody can easily click that, read about the campaign for the Return of Camazotz issue number 2, and then hopefully back both 1 and 2 so that you can get the full story, because it's horror comics done right, man. I love what you guys over at the Grimcore Studios are doing. Happy to count you as post-punks and part of my inner circle pit of friends. Any last final words?
Yeah, man, just thank you, man. Thank you for having me back on. I'm sorry some of the guys that we tried to get on couldn't be here, but we wish them the best, and I hope that you can get those guys on here at some point, because those two guys were really good writers and horror writers in their own rights. So shout out to Mickey and John Avina who couldn't be here, but we miss you guys. And back the Return of Camazotz, it's out right now on Kickstarter. And check me out at Camazotz Comics. If you ever want to chat and talk about horror or making comics, feel free to shoot me a message. I'm happy to help people out. And and this has always been a great time with you, man. I love being on your show, and you have one of the best ones, and so just happy to be here again. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, dude. Hang tight after this. Oh, let me get a screenshot to use as our thumbnail. All right, ready?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, so I will get that posted. Hang tight after I end this. I got some logistics for you, as you know, and then that'll be it. So thanks for tuning in, checking out the very first all horror centric episode of Longbox Punk. I've had a blast hanging out with Rafael Flores Jr. talking Return of Camazotz issue number 2 on Kickstarter, which you should definitely go back right now before Halloween, because the campaign ends, it's dead on Halloween, as they say. So that's going to be it for this episode. What's a good podcast without a good tagline? This is mine. Go do what's good for you, punks, and read some horror comics. We are out of here.